Happy New Year. And we'll read the Diplogue version of that in just a few minutes. But welcome. Good morning, good evening, good late night, depending on where you are. Today, we're going to talk about lifestyle changes for New Year's resolutions. Odd we would pick that topic given this time period. This research came from Australia. The first article that we talk about. If you're not that familiar with our channel, basically what we do is we look at the things that cause more death and disability in our world than anything else. And no, we've looked at things like infectious diseases like COVID, but COVID doesn't cause that. You might say poverty does that, but I think you'd get some debate about that. Heart attack, stroke, cardiovascular diseases are the number one causes of death and disability in our world. And what's interesting is there's an underlying cause for at least 80%, probably closer to 90%. And it's not, you could say it's completely preventable. It's mostly preventable, but the risk associated with it is almost completely preventable. And yet, unfortunately, 2/3 of the doctors here in the United States don't know how to diagnose it, let alone manage it. So we've got an issue here in terms of our health. The things that cause the most death and disability, our doctors really don't know how to diagnose. That is a problem. And that's what this channel is all about, helping people understand and recognize that problem. You see, the vast majority of insulin resistance, diabetes and prediabetes, are totally undiagnosed, unrecognized, and meanwhile, they're burning the insides of your arteries. Well, that only is a problem for tissues that are supplied by arteries. And that's just about every tissue. You might say, well, bones, no, bones have plenty of supply by arteries. In fact, there is a tissue that's not that well supplied by arteries, and that is cartilage in your joints. But just about everything else has a blood supply. And if it has a blood supply, it's got arteries. And if the arteries are getting burned and rotted out from the inside by cardiovascular inflammation, which in the most part is caused by inability to metabolize the carbs that we're eating, then that's a problem. There are other causes. For example, most people do realize that diabetes is a major cause of heart attack and stroke, but they just don't realize how many people have it. There's another cause. People with full rheumatoid arthritis have as much risk for for heart attack and stroke as people with diabetes. There's some other inflammatory diseases that do that as well. For example, psoriatic arthritis. Same thing. It's an inflammatory disease, and the inflammation caused by the psoriatic arthritis, not just psoriasis, but psoriatic arthritis, which is in many ways a different disease. That inflammation causes inflammation in the arteries as well. In fact, we've known about this for over 20 years. There were a couple of guys, Paul Ridker and Gavin Blake, faculty at Harvard, or Brigham and Women in Harvard, at Harvard, first discovered this when they started looking at these studies on LDL, our cholesterol values, statins, and heart attacks. And one of the things they found was whether the cholesterol was up or down, people that were taking statins tended to have fewer heart attacks. And so they said, well, what's going on with that? It's not just LDL. And what they did after they began to investigate this was what they found was that statins decrease cardiovascular inflammation. And, one of the biggest challenges for the medical community is that the medical community, even though it's understood, at least theoretically, inflammation for a long time, couldn't wrap their heads, myself included for many years, couldn't wrap my head around what is vascular inflammation. And it's simple once you get microscopic in scope. You see, plaque is it's not like hair lining the sink, the outlet of a sink or a bathtub, and therefore slowly cutting off the outlet. Plaque is inside the wall of the artery. And, most people, yeah, doctors are especially guilty of this because we know heart attack and stroke, these events cannot be predicted, like hair in a bathtub. As it continues to build up, you can predict that sooner or later this is getting to a point to where it's going to cause an event. That's not the way it happens with heart attack and stroke. In fact, people with very little plaque can and do. In fact, over half of people with very little plaque, not enough plaque to even impact the flow, have heart attacks. In other words, most of the people that have heart attacks and strokes don't have enough plaque to even impact the flow in their arteries. So again, you would think we would have figured this out. And unfortunately, we're still in the process of understanding that. The vast majority of doctors do now understand that cardiovascular inflammation is a big deal. They just don't know what to do about it. So they continue to look for high LDLs, quote, bad cholesterol, end quote. Cholesterol's cholesterol. Whether it's like, what's the difference between good and bad? I mean, that's confusion regarding the protein that makes up the particles, not the cholesterol itself. So anyhow, most doctors continue to look at, quote, bad cholesterol, LDL, and treat that. Well, that's one of the many reasons that heart attack and stroke and other cardiovascular events are still the major cause of death and disability in our world. We do things like stents and bypass grafts, despite the fact that multiple randomized clinical trials, the COURAGE trial, the ORBITA trial, the ischemia trials, have made it very clear that stents do not prevent heart attacks. And in fact, after the results of the COURAGE and ORBITA trials, a lot of people began to lean towards, well, okay, stents don't prevent heart attacks, but that means that you've really got to do a full bypass graft. And then the ischemia trial came along and showed, no, that doesn't work either. That doesn't prevent heart attacks. Now, don't misunderstand me. When you're having a heart attack and a stent can be used to remove the clot that caused the heart attack, a stent can save lives, but it does not prevent heart attacks. And guess what portion of stents are done to prevent heart attacks, therefore are worthless, versus the number of stents that are done to save a life during a heart attack? 50-50? 60-40? 30-70? No. 90-10. Oh, okay. So we're only doing 10% of our stents inappropriately. No, it's the other way around. 10% of stents are done for appropriate reasons because someone's having a heart attack, and we can remove that clot. The other 90% are done to prevent a heart attack. And again, randomized clinical trials reported in the New England Journal, JAMA, Lancet, have all shown they do not prevent heart attacks. So we've got a lot to learn about the things that are most likely to kill and disable us. And let me go back and ask another question. So since these studies have demonstrated that stents don't really prevent heart attack, or bypass grafts really don't prevent heart attack, that would mean that there's a mass change going on in cardiology and cardiothoracic surgery where fewer and fewer stents are being done, correct? No. Since those studies, more and more stents and bypass grafts are done to prevent heart attacks. So why is that? Well, do you have any idea what kind of impact financially it would have on all the cardiology community? Maybe not every cardiologist, but the cardiologists that it would not impact financially are rare exceptions. Rare exceptions. So when your ability to make your house payment, your car payment, to put food on the table depends on doing something, you tend to believe in doing it. And you know what they say, if you're a hammer, everything tends to look like a nail. So, yep, we're doing more and more stents, more and more bypass grafts to prevent heart attacks, despite the fact that we now know that they don't. So, let's talk about what actually does. It's lifestyle changes. And you know what? This is the season of the year. We start seeing more patients. We get busier because people say, you know what? I'm going to finally make those changes. My doc's been telling me to lose weight. My doc's been telling me this. I know I need to lose weight. I don't need my doc to tell me that. But that can be difficult, right? Yeah. By March, we tend to start slowing down again because people are off to the next thing and they've acknowledged, I just may not make it. I will tell you, that is changing dramatically. In terms of folks watching this channel, major improvements in success rates for weight loss, and now even recent, a couple of things. Number one, lifestyle changes. If I've heard it once, I've heard it hundreds of times now, where somebody comes to me and they've already lost 30 pounds, and I ask them, how did you do it? The answer was, well, first of all, I cut my carbs. And when I did that, something funny happened. I wasn't as hungry anymore. It was like, well, you know what happened? They became fat adapted, and there was little to no transition from burning the fuel that was in their gut to burning the fuel that was on their hips. That's what happens when you get fat adapted. A lot of people tell me, oh, I'm down to one meal a day. Well, again, you don't do one meal a day or significant decrease in your eating window and still not get fat adapted. So you last about a day and a half on carbs stored in your liver. And then you start getting to where the mechanisms, the proteins that you normally use to burn fat, kick back into gear. Now, if you've been living on carbs 4 times a day for 20 or 30 years, you don't have those proteins active, and it's going to take you a few months. And guess what? You're going to go through that keto flu, and that's just going to happen. But that's going to last. It takes a few weeks to a couple of months to fully replenish your body with the proteins necessary to run a fat adapted metabolism, to learn how to burn fat. But Rome was not accomplished in a day. You can try to accomplish it in a 1 week starvation style fasting. That's, a lot of people accomplish that. And if you've got a time period, you've got some time off, you want to do it that way, and you'd rather just crash through the glass. A lot of people do it that way very successfully. If you look at fasting, 1 meal a day, or what most people call intermittent fasting, with 2 meals a day, that helps immensely. But then we reported on that a couple of weeks ago. But then when you start getting into techniques for weight loss, successful techniques, as I said, most people tell me they started by decreasing their carbs. Then they went into intermittent fasting. And most folks are successful with just that. I'm a big fan of extended fasting, prolonged fasting, 24 hours, 36 hours or more. And I just don't get a whole lot of takers on that. There are huge changes in opportunities for weight loss in terms of medications now. And it comes in the forms of medications for diabetes. It's no surprise when you do what I do for a living and work with people regarding cardiovascular risk, you realize by far the number one problem on a day-to-day basis, you're going to think I'm going to say fat, right? No, the number one problem is aging. Number two, though, is body fat. You can't do anything about changing your age, your chronological age, but you can do something about body fat. And guess what? That's been a challenge for ever, and it's becoming easier and easier and easier. There are a couple of drug classes now that are just huge in this area. One in particular, the GLP-1s. It's interesting. Pop quiz. Does anybody know how and where the GLP-1s were discovered? It was a fellow looking at different proteins. That was what he did for a living. And he happened to look at the proteins in Gila monster saliva, Gila monster spit. And he found some of the original GLP-1s. Does anybody know what the GLP-1s are? They are hormones. They're hormones that I first heard about when I was in medical school, and I never heard about again until past few years when the GLP-1s came out. You see, believe it or not, the intestines make hormones. And those hormones, glucagon-like peptide. And that's what GLP-1 stands for, glucagon-like peptide. What these hormones do is they say, okay, we're the intestines, we're starting to, we're working down here. So they tell the stomach to not dump anymore, to close off. And in addition, they say to the pancreas, we're getting ready to dump food, glucose, and other things into the bloodstream. So you better be ready with more insulin. So you get stimulation of the pancreas to create insulin, and you get stimulation of the stomach to stop dumping food into the intestines. And that's what glucagon does. Well, what we have found is there's nothing like the GLP-1s to help people lose weight. Huge, huge improvements in opportunities here. And in fact, so much so that, yes, as I said before, my original activity is helping the world save itself from, helping individuals in this world save themselves from diabetes. But by far and away, the number one reversible risk factor for diabetes is body fat. We used to think that body fat was an inert energy storage tissue, and then we found out, that's anything but true. I did a series on a lecture titled "The Secret Life of Fat Cells." It won awards for basically demonstrating that fat cells are not inert energy storage tissue. Fat cells are endocrine tissue, and they drive this insulin resistance more than anything else. It makes sense, if you've got a whole lot of fat in your cell, insulin helps you put more fat in that cell. So there are a couple of reasons why it makes sense, but the bottom line is, what can we do about it? Well, there's been a huge change. Anti-diabetic drugs called GLP-1s are saving lives like crazy. They've been out almost a decade now. In fact, one of them's going to be losing its patent next year, I believe, maybe later this year. And they're making a big difference. In fact, as I said before, it's no surprise to somebody that does what I do for a living that the number one, by far the best diabetes drug we've ever had is also by far the best diet drug we've ever had. So guess what? It's been discovered by rich people, and you can't get it now. Get a prescription for Ozempic and take it to your local pharmacy and see the reaction that you'll get. I've even covered this. I've had to do several videos showing what we do in order to deal with the Ozempic shortage, because everybody from Elon Musk to I don't remember, bunches and bunches of wealthy people are taking Ozempic. Why wealthy people? Because it costs about $1,000 a month. A lot of people that I work with are on Medicare, and I have not seen Medicare push back on it. I've usually been able to get the Ozempic as well as other GLP-1s through Medicare. So again, that's a little bit of a diatribe on what we do, how we do it, and what makes a difference in life. We're going to talk about lifestyle today. And let me tell you, I've had countless people come to me on these drugs, GLP-1s, that had not lost a pound. In fact, had even gained some weight. So one of the things that you need to remember is that, yes, although we are improving each year our ability as humans to make medications that help people, there's still nothing like lifestyle. Lifestyle is the king. I guess it will always be the king. And isn't that sort of like life itself? The best things in life are free, but not easy. So let's go back and talk for a minute. If you've never been on our channel, let's show you a few of the previous topics that we've covered. We've got over 1,000 videos out there covering everything from how to test for cardiovascular inflammation. Again, your doctor won't know how to do that. To value-based care and commercial risk. Why would I even be talking about that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one is we're doing more discussions recently about a new channel that we're developing and a new website that we're developing with a new service that we have developed in the past. There's only so many people I can see as a physician. My time is limited. And if I heard it once, I've heard it hundreds of times. Hey, doc, why don't you teach my doc how to do this, how to do the prevention, how to do, and I've heard multiple docs say, you've done very well in Medicare Advantage in a much bigger environment. Can we learn how to do that? Can we learn how to do prevention? And the answer is yes. That's what we're doing. We're setting up programs where we can teach your doc how to do what we do. Now you just got to convince your doc to try it. So we're starting to cover some topics related to how your doctor can actually start doing what we do. We cover a lot of the science, caloric restriction versus intermittent fasting. Again, a topic, these 3 topics, by the way, are 3 of the over 1,000 that we've just covered over the very, very recent past. And as you'll see, we cover lifestyle. Like today's going to be lifestyle and what it means, or what it has meant for a group of study participants around New Year's resolutions. Caloric restriction versus intermittent fasting. One of the things that we found was that they always said, well, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they said everything was about caloric restriction. It was just been over the past decade, maybe a little bit more, that everybody started getting into intermittent fasting. Well, when we covered this issue, one of the things that became really clear was it wasn't that the reality changed, the science changed somewhat, and it was because in looking at laboratory models, things that we did that we thought were caloric restriction were actually intermittent fasting anyway. You were feeding lab animals all at one time during the day. You're feeding them a little bit less, but you were feeding them at one time, and therefore creating, and they were competing with each other for the food. So the food was gone within a matter of minutes. So those animals were on OMAD, and the researchers doing it really didn't think about that. So we went into some detail on that and covered a couple of studies which demonstrated that. Here's another thing that we've covered, again, in the area of helping you understand what's happening to doctors, why doctors have in the past come in, slapped you on the back, ask you how you're doing, tried to find a reason to write a script and get out the door within 7 minutes, and how that is changing. That's called fee for service, and how it's changing into fee for value. In fact, fee for value really doesn't care how much time you spend with the patient. It usually takes a lot more time with the patient because it's really looking at the value of, are you helping that patient manage and prevent their disease? So again, a very different kind of healthcare. Most of the doctors have gotten some exposure to fee for value, but again, most doctors just don't know how to do it yet because it's still pretty young. So that's some of what we do. If you'd like to say, well, all of that's really helpful, but I'm sort of new to this channel. I just want to take care of my health. Well, we've got a basic curriculum for you. We usually charge $19 to $49, depending on what deal you find on those. We'll even give it to you for free because we think this is important information. Within a couple of hours, you can know more about insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, plaque, cardiovascular inflammation than your doctor knows. And that is a good thing. It may sound like a lot of work, but guess what? A couple of hours invested now is going to save you decades of not only life, but non-disabled life, healthy life. Now you say, well, you know what? I've been really wrapped up in politics and I don't like YouTube anymore. I don't like Facebook. okay, we're doing Rumble as well and locals. We've got a lot of folks that are locals aficionados or locals fans, and we've got a lot of content that's on locals that's not on any other outlet. If you're a YouTuber and you say, look, I would really like to help you, I can see that you're saving lives. How do I do that? Well, I don't want to, I've got severe limitations in what I can do, but I'd like to help a little bit. You can join the YouTube channel. We have Patreon as well. And if you want to just give like $5, you can do a super chat. And we'll probably have a couple of people do that during the show today. And Gilbert will be able to show you how to do that. How can you access us? Monthly subscription plans, fee for a visit with us. There are multiple different ways, and we're working right now on doing a fee for value program. Fee for value programs are just, the dollars involved are too big for individuals for us to offer that to an individual. But you can offer it to Medicare. Medicare's got a lot of big dollars slashing around. Flushes, well, whatever you call that. And we're working on that. In fact, I got hung up with a technical issue with the bureaucrats today at Medicare. I have people continuing to ask, when's Medicare going to be ready? When's Medicare going to be ready? Well, it's when the bureaucrats finally agree to start to take our enrollment applications. We had one and we were all set up and we functioned and that program continues to function in the state of Alabama. This one is for this program. You have to do a totally different set of applications using a totally different NPI, which is a technical word for National Practitioner Identification Number. And today, about 45 minutes before we started, I got this panicked call from our enrollment person, or a panicked email. She said, oh, you got to stop immediately and change your signature on your ETF, electronic funds transfer. And why was that? Because the original signature had been Ford Brewer, MD, or Ford Brewer. And she said, and what we have your name down is Thomas F. Brewer. And the enrollment bureaucrats at Medicare are not going to accept it. And by the way, this thing is diddled around so long, it's about to lapse in terms of the application. So it's like, there you go. You asked, that's what we're waiting on. More of that. I know that we can do it. Our team did it. It took about the same time period to do it in Alabama, and it'll continue to take time to get it set up here. We have a book, if you haven't heard of it. It's all about why stress tests don't predict heart attacks. Again, it's based on a lot of the stuff that I talked about before, but this introduction is getting a little bit long in the tooth, so I'm going to move ahead. We have a chronic care management program. I actually talked to a group yesterday that does, that started by providing, and they got funding, they got financing to do a remote cardiovascular rehab program. Very interesting group called CARTA. And they're starting a CCM program. We already have one that we've piloted to get ready for Medicare. So more to be discussed on that issue, and we'll keep you posted on it. As I mentioned, we've got a new website, we've got a new YouTube channel, and it's about helping your doctor understand what we do, both in terms of getting paid completely differently and not having to send and sell your patient population back to the hospital. Doctors are in a major retirement phase right now. They're sick of healthcare, they're sick of insurance, and they're sick of the treadmill that they have themselves and their patients on. Even then, your typical doctor's, individual doctor's practice tends to have patients on better care programs than hospital-owned primary care practices. But guess what? Guess what your typical doc does when he or she is retiring? They sell that practice back to the hospital. The hospital rarely gives them significant value for that. And even more so, even worse, the hospital puts the patients back on that treadmill. That's the wrong thing to do. And again, we're developing systems. We taught doctors how to keep that from happening, how to see patients, take the time necessary, half an hour. In fact, our first patient in the Alabama project had been we had spent over an hour and a half of nurse practitioner time and then doctor time, about 45 minutes of NP time, half an hour, and then an hour of doctor time. And the doctor came out and he said, "Yeah, I know you said we would take up the full hour, but we've got so many things going on with this individual. To dig that deep, we're going to have to see him back before we complete all of the stuff he's got going on." And that's in fact what happens when you do fee for value. You end up taking time because you have to get to where the patient is. Why is that? Why is it so important to understand what the patient's perceptions are? Because the prescription that I write for you, or even the procedures that we may do for you, are minimal in impact compared to the decisions you make multiple times a day. We said it earlier and already. Lifestyle is king. It's more important than any miracle drug, clearly any supplement, and even procedures. So 5 key healthcare trends. This is an interesting point. Again, it has to do with what's going on in healthcare and how this is going to impact and steer the doctor's behavior, the doctors that you're seeing. Medicare Advantage growth will lean Medicare into privatization. That's actually what a couple of things that we talked about before. You're going to see more adoption of Medicare Advantage fee for value type of programs in commercial healthcare. And you're going to see Medicare Advantage programs being adopted and working in privatized medicine. So it's more of a public health approach to privatized healthcare. I know that both of those concepts start getting into major cannon fodder for what's the best way to organize healthcare. Is it privatized or government? I'm not going to go into that argument, that debate. I've functioned and been successful on both sides, and I will leave it at that. Corporate healthcare will continue to advance in primary care. I've also done a lot of work. In fact, most of my, first 30 years of my career was with corporate healthcare. It was with a company that is still alive today, a company called Premise. Premise meaning on premises, on-site healthcare. I started with one of Premise's ancestors, a group called Corporate Health Dimensions, CHD, Corporate Health something, based out of DC. And in terms of revenue, that program was just a side hustle of a larger company. I think revenue at that time was like 25 to 40 million. We grew that quickly over the next few years to closer to 300 million, which basically means growing from 5 or 6 clinics to 20 and 30 clinics, bigger clinics, providing on-site prevention and healthcare for employee populations. Then we merged and became a $1 billion company. financed by a group called Water Street in Chicago, and partially by Walgreens. Then it continued to grow. I had been interested at that point for years. I was frustrated with the way things were developing in that space, and really more frustrated than anything else that things were not moving ahead with on-site, remote healthcare, telemedicine. I had been banging my head against the walls or the ceilings of trying to get people to accept the education-based preventive healthcare programs. And guess what? Be careful what you ask for. I had scars and arrows in my back for 10 years trying to get that to happen, and people just didn't want to accept it. Well, then we had the pandemic. And guess what? People are used to remote healthcare now. Item number 3, specialty care will increase private equity standing and bundle payments will fuel returns. When I was actively running the Alabama program, I had one of these companies approach me. It was a company on the West Coast, which is doing exactly that. Basically, what they're doing is fee for value in a specialty arrangement, not just primary care. And that is a major trend. Provider-owned ACOs and value-based care initiatives will remain stable. I have a little bit of argument with that because here's the thing. It's because ACOs have always, they were like training wheels for getting into true fee-for-value. And you saw academic groups getting into it. You saw larger groups that really couldn't control themselves that well. They were a good fit for that because of the bumpers that they put around the performance for those programs tended to hamstring those programs as well. And the performance of those programs was just, it was mediocre. Financial performance, but that poor mediocre financial performance was driven by mediocre clinical performance and preventive performance. Well, Medicare has recognized that. They've acknowledged that, and they developed a thing called ACO Reach, and that's supposed to change everything. Many of us are optimistic. I think it will change things in a big way, but I still think it remains to be seen regarding how big ACOs and value-based care initiatives are going to be in that space. And then the big thing that everybody tends to get excited or afraid of, artificial intelligence. It'll leverage data for value-based care. And I can tell you again, I've been looking for AI to take this over for a while. I've worked with an AI company for 5 years now called K-Health. K-Health came from Israel. They're basically a digital urgent care environment. And I set up the credentialing, some of the quality program or the credentialing programs for them. And they were listed years ago in the Forbes 50 AI, and it was 50 companies that were truly doing AI, not just saying they were doing AI. In value-based care, it's really clear what AI needs to be doing. It needs to be scrubbing past charts to see what kind of risks, what kind of diseases that the patient has had, didn't really understand it, or what sort of signs of disease, like an A1C in the high 5s or 6.5, which would indicate that the patient has a significant risk that's just being unrecognized. So again, these are some of the trends to expect over the next year. Now we're going to get to, what does it do? What happens when you do New Year's resolutions for your health? New Year's resolutions, do they work? Well, let's see. This was a study featured in the New York Times. There are lifestyle components for cardiovascular prevention, including a combination of diet and exercise. It came from British Medical Journal last year in Australia. The authors of the study looked for association between physical activity, diet, cardiovascular disease, and diet and adiposity or fat-related cancer mortality. This was a population-based cohort study based in the UK on the National Health death records up to April 20. They used statistical models to examine associations between self-reported physical activity, diet quality, cardiovascular disease, obesity-related cancer mortality, death. And here's what they found. During a median follow-up of 11.2 years, there were 2,650 participants dying from cardiovascular disease, 4,520 from obesity-related cancers. People with both higher levels of physical activity and better quality diets had the lowest mortality rates. Intense exercise had a particularly low risk for cardiovascular disease mortality. Now, let's go back. High quality diet was defined as 4.5 cups of fruit and vegetables per day, 2 or more servings of fish, and less than 2 servings of processed meat per day. Now, having said all of that, I would expect to get a lot of hater comments because, all that fruit and a lot of those vegetables are likely to be bad for you. I mean, does that include 2 bananas, an apple, and some sugar beets? Well, for some people, I'm sure it did. And this is the interesting part to me. I would say in a lot of people that did include that. And how could people get better with that kind of sugar, carb intake? Well, let me go back and make a comment. I've said this before many times. If you're familiar with the group, the magician couple, Penn and Teller, Penn Jillette weighed what? 300 pounds, 280, something like that. He lost close to 100 pounds, maybe a little bit over 100 pounds on a mono diet consisting of nothing but potatoes. And I can tell you, doing what I do for a living, him having lost 100 pounds of fat far outweighed the risk components of eating all of those potato carbs. So carbs are important, but body fat's more important. Remember that. And again, how did they define moderate and intense physical activity? The latter was being that vigorous activity lasted more than 10 minutes. So this is very analogous to the study that appeared in the New England Journal comparing lifestyle to metformin. Very, very light physical activity, like in walking 3 or 4 times a week. Minimum, what was it, like less than 5-pound weight loss. Those were 3 times more impactful than a full dose of metformin. So again, as we see, a couple of things. Number one, it's not like you have to go full keto, that you have to lose 30 pounds, that you have to become a world-class sprinter. Intensity in each of those areas really does help. But just little baby nudges helps too. It makes a big, big difference. So, adherence to both quality diet and sufficient physician activity is important to reduce the risk of mortality. I would say the diet is critical. I would also say physician activity was a typo. It was supposed to be physical activity. It's not just about burning calories. It's about intentionality intentionally eating more consciously and moving your body, just get out there and do it. Don't worry about what level you can reach. Better than what you're doing now is a major success. So, Gilbert, if you'll give us the intro, we'll go into Q&A for today. Goodness, I told you we'd have a couple of super chats. We've got one today from, let me see if I can find that, Rick Willer. Thank you so much, Rick. I don't remember seeing that name. Hi, Dr. Brewer. Do you recommend the same statin and dosage you use to your patients for arterial plaque? Pravastatin, 1 milligram per day. And why is it chosen? Baby aspirin? Thank you so much. Much respect, sir. Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you for that super chat. And if you're interested in how to do it, look at the upper right-hand corner, and Gilbert's showing you how to do that. And, you know, $25 makes a big difference. A lot of the work that we do, we offshore. For example, Gilbert and some of the other guys working on, Gilbert is a great graphics guy in addition to obviously being our technical co-host for the show. He lives in the Philippines. We have several other guys, video editors that live in the Philippines. And that $25 goes a long way to helping us get this information out in a way such that people can actually bear to look at it. When I still get grief, by the way. I used to do this all by myself, and I would print out these documents and I would hold them in front of the thing and I would point. They called that the shaky paper days. A lot of people tell me they miss the shaky paper days. Well, sometimes I do too, but not a lot. It's so much nicer to have Gilbert doing what he's doing right now. Thank you, Gilbert. And to have the graphics that Gilbert provides and the work that Aspen and Sam and now others are providing to help us. This helps us make that happen. Now, back to your question. I recommend the same statin and dosage you use for patients? Here's the thing. You know, I mentioned in the introduction that a couple of guys, Paul Ridker and Gavin Blake, discovered that statins were actually decreasing cardiovascular inflammation, not just decreasing LDL levels. Well, one of the other things that we found was that it doesn't take 80 grams of Lipitor to do that. In fact, Lipitor is really good at lowering your LDL, but it's not that good at lowering cardiovascular inflammation, especially if you have diabetes or prediabetes, which is over 80% of us. So I don't use Lipitor, the most commonly used one out there. In addition, other ones like Pravastatin, some of the others are okay, they're good. But we really used to use them more before Crestor or rosuvastatin lost its patent. Why? Because there was a thing called KIF6, and that gets really technical. It also gets into genetic testing. And bottom line is you don't have to worry about that with Crestor. So use of simvastatin, pitavastatin, some of those went out the door with, for cardiovascular inflammation, went out the door with Crestor, which was more expensive at that time, like pitavastatin is now, when Crestor lost its patent. So the only one that's really good and is still under patent is pitavastatin. Why is it good? Well, it's the only one that doesn't increase. It's got a major side effect advantage. It does not increase insulin resistance. Even Crestor does, but not really significantly at doses of 5 milligrams per day or less. Yeah, 20 milligrams, 40 milligrams of Crestor, even 10 starts to get there in terms of causing more insulin resistance. So you're sort of feeding the devil, or, you know, making things worse when you start with most statins. Not quite so much with pitavastatin. So if you can afford pitavastatin, that's what I recommend. But I personally, right now, I've gone back to taking rosuvastatin myself, and it had to do with a cost-related issue. I'm on Medicare now, but a long story in terms of reimbursement, etc. So what do I recommend? Low dose. I don't recommend high doses. Which statins? Pitavastatin, or what's also called Livalo. Zapetamag is another version of it. Pivasta is a generic coming out of India. That's another version of pitavastatin. I've taken all of those. And then Crestor. And the recommendation is usually 5 milligrams per day or less. So great question, Rick Willer. I appreciate it. It gave me the opportunity to get a little bit deeper into a question that I get all the time. Another one. Thank you again, Rick. How do you? Okay, no, I think that's the same one and it just got repeated. So I think we're good there. Let me go back up to the top. Dwight Baldwin. Hi, Dr. Brewer. When taking a daily baby aspirin for prevention, does it matter for the chewable or enteric version what enteric coated is used? Enteric coats are, they used to be unreliable. Sometimes you'll find the pill whole in poop. So in other words, it never made it through the enteric coating. Enteric coatings are a little better these days. Bottom line is I wouldn't use enteric coating unless I really had to. Chewable's okay, regular's okay. And 360 milligrams adult aspirin is not okay. Don't take it. It actually increases your risk. Take baby aspirin. I get it a lot where people say, well, if a baby aspirin is good, then then a lot more is a lot better. No, it's not. You start getting into a different metabolic profile when you increase the amounts that much. Another big question that comes up about use of baby aspirin is, you've seen headlines several times over the past couple of years. I'm blanking on the names of the trials, but these made it into things like the New York Times, where they said, oh, don't use baby aspirin anymore for primary prevention. Well, so Brewer, what, are you behind? Are you not aware of that? I'm very much aware of that. And actually, I got some of this from Brad and Amy, Bale and Deneen, in terms of looking hard at the recommendations for baby aspirin. The bottom line was I never recommended baby aspirin since those early meetings about almost 10 years ago now, have not recommended baby aspirin based on age. That would be primary prevention. I only recommend baby aspirin based on documentation that you have plaque. And, I was doing that with one of my patients this week. It was not really clear that she had plaque. She had a significant increase in her LDL. Her doc was wanting her to go on statins. And my perspective was, I don't feel nearly as strong. And I personally wouldn't recommend them until we know that you've got plaque, and we don't know that yet. At that point, I'd recommend the low dose statin and the baby aspirin. And so what does that mean about this recommendation that they don't recommend it for primary prevention anymore? Primary prevention is you don't have the disease yet. And I would agree, that's been my practice for over a decade. I don't recommend baby aspirin or statins if it's still primary prevention for cardiovascular disease. In other words, you don't have any plaque. However, I do recommend that you look at plaque, and I don't recommend that you use a stress test to do that. I recommend 3 things. And in fact, that's in my book, if you want to take a look at it. I go into the details of the 3 things that I would use for plaque recognition. Dwight Baldwin, vitamin K2 levels of 400 micrograms as you've recommended. Does it increase risk of clotting? No, it doesn't. That's not K2. That's the other vitamin K. Like having plaque or high LP little a. No, plaque, vitamin K2 does not increase clotting. Just let me say it. Vitamin K2 does not increase clotting. JMK 2921, is it really LP(a) particles, not LDL particles, that contribute to coronary plaque formation? Well, JMK, that really depends on who you ask. And if it depends on who you ask, then as you see, it begins to look like a matter of opinion. And it is. You know, some people use the term, when it's a fire, when there's a fire, you come running up, you try to deal with the fire, and you see somebody else there. Are they the arsonist, or are they trying to put out the fire? And guess what? There is a raging, right in my space, in my area, it's a raging debate, and it's been going on for well over a decade now about both of these, LP(a) and LDL. Are they the arsonists, or are they actually helping with the inflammation? And here's the answer. We don't know. There's a lot of evidence. You know, if you talk to 90% of docs, maybe 95%, they would all say, oh, it's crystal clear, never has been a question. They are the arsonist. And again, 90% of docs don't even know about LP(a). So, but the ones that do know about LP(a) would say, yeah, that's the arsonist. And the answer is, we don't know. In fact, evidence, I personally I've been making this slow progression to where I'm beginning to think more and more and more that these are either somebody that was trying to put out the fire, or just a bystander that happened to be around when it happened. And an indicator, in other words, a bioindicator. So great question, JMK. I appreciate it. Bobby Ocampo, Mabuhay Malusag na Bagong Ton. In other words, Happy New Year. Thank you. Happy New Year to you, Bobby. And Bobby is in the Philippines. And I think is that called Tagalog, Gilbert?
Yes, Doc, Tagalog.
Okay, Tagalog. So
Yes.
Happy New Year. And I'm not even going to try to read that again.
That means healthy New Year.
Very good. Thank you, Gilbert. And thank you, Bobby Ocampo. Bobby is a frequent attendee. Melissa, Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you. And healthy New Year. I've left out the most important part. Sometimes I think I would debate. I think happy may be more important than healthy, but they're both very important. And it's really hard to attain and maintain happiness without some nod, at least, to being healthy. Rick Folia, good morning from Atlanta. Thanks, Rick. Is there a stat someplace that tells us how many doctors don't know how to diagnose prediabetes? Yes. If so, where can I see that? Well, you can see it in my videos. I've covered it multiple times. There were some studies done from Mayo Clinic. I believe that's in, well, just look up frequency, look up my channel on Ford Brewer Heart Attack and Stroke Prevention, and look up failure to diagnose diabetes and prediabetes. Hopefully you'll find that. Again, it's 1,000 videos. The AI can be a little bit cranky as you start getting that high, that many. But folks at Hopkins have demonstrated this. Multiple folks have demonstrated this. And in fact, you know, Gilbert, if you will take a note and a message, just let Jesus know that we just need to cover that again. And hopefully we can get that back on the queue and just cover that so people like Rick can actually see it rather than just hearing me refer to it. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. JMK, do you routinely check fibrinogen levels in your secondary prevention patients? We don't. We know that that has been proposed as a significant risk factor. I wouldn't argue that it has been associated as a risk factor. I don't have a problem if a patient wants to look at that. The reality, though, is that for the most part, I've seen those risk factor components wash out when you start including other more important risk factors like OGTT and insulin response. So we're washing out means when you look at a multifactorial analysis, you may see something like factor number one being a risk factor, but once you add factor number two into the analysis, factor number two covers it all. Factor number one disappears. And so then what happens, what you begin to realize is that factor number one is a bioindicator of factor number two. Hope that wasn't too confusing. That's an old epidemiology thing. Bambi Grage, good to hear from you, Bambi. Thanks for Happy New Year to you, and thanks for appearing. Or Rick Foley, do you have a short description of your new physicians network that we can give to our people? Oh, yeah, it's on the channel. We also have brochures. The best way to do that is to get them to go to the channel and take a look. It's for PCPs right now, primary care practitioners, and we will. Thank you, Gilbert. Hey, and Gilbert, are you able to show the links? We have those somewhere. If we don't have, are you able to show those, Gilbert? If we don't, let's get those ready for the group next week. And I would tell you, if you will go look at the Physicians Prevention Network, we mentioned it last week, we need to get 100 subscribers. And just from that mention, we went to from 35 to 75. We only need 25 or 30 more. And when we do that, Sam can make a link that makes a lot more sense, that's easier to see and understand. So we'll be working on that for you, Rick. Thank you so much for your interest. Bobby Ocampo, best lifestyle is fasting, intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting. I don't think I could agree more, Bobby. If KW, I'm not sure what that meant. One internet doctor says Japan is using 45 milligrams of K2 for arthritis. Does it mean we can also use this much? Yes, to reduce cardiovascular inflammation. Hope there will be a trial. Well, Bobby, you bring up a really good point. You know, people talk, and I say that when I'm talking about it, I say these 100 microgram doses of K2 it's the standard of what you see in these supplements. And I think that's way too little. I think that the issue with K2 is that it's associated with improvement of insulin resistance. And the only study that I've seen actually used 400 micrograms, not 100. It was in middle-aged men. Now, here's the other point. If you're in the US right now, I know for sure, if you go to Amazon and you look up megadose K2, you will find this 45 milligrams of vitamin K2. Now, why would you see that? Because there have been studies which showed a significant improvement in bone osteoporosis. So, what else does that tell us? Well, it tells us one thing, Bobby, which I think is very important. Unlike vitamin D, overdoses of which can kill you or, shut down your kidneys and result in death, you don't get that kind of overdose effect or danger or risk with vitamin K2. We're talking about 100 micrograms in your standard dose, but for cardiovascular disease, but for osteoporosis, the dose is like 150 times that amount. So be a little bit more liberal with your K2 if you're looking at that for cardiovascular disease. It was a great point, Bobby. Thank you so much for bringing it up. JMK 2129, are cardiovascular inflammation biomarkers better than stress tests for risk stratification when it comes to MACE? Cardiovascular events. The answer is yes. Oh gosh, again, please get the book. That's my whole point. I mean, if you look at the standard, or if you define standard as the most common form, your typical doc today in the US will start with his or her internal version of Framingham. And their internal version of Framingham is wrong. It's not what it's supposed to be. Even the standards committee will acknowledge that. Hey, great. Let me stop for a second. PrevMedHeartRisk.com/doctors and patients. Is that it? Is that the link, Gilbert?
Yes, Doc.
Thank you very much. And let's just put it on a slide so we can refer back to that on a regular basis. So, and actually, since we've got that, that must mean we may have hit over 100. Anyway, so where were we? Oh my goodness. Oh, okay. So, are cardiovascular inflammation biomarkers better than stress tests? So, your typical doctor will do in his or her head their version of what's called Framingham. Framingham is a small community about an hour from Boston, and it's where there are more studies. It's a big database community for cardiovascular disease. There are more studies for cardiovascular disease done out of that database than any other database that's existed. And so they say it's the Framingham risk calculator. And this basically, on a practical basis, what this turns down to is your doc saying, well, it's a 61-year-old male smoker with high LDL. You know, they're basically going through risk factors in their head. Framingham is wrong. It's not that it's not good. It's got its place, but it's way overused. And for the most part, I think, I don't know if it contributes to more damage than good or not. That's a debatable point. On the one hand, it does help doctors coach patients that, hey, I've got some concerns about you. You've got some major risk factors here. But then here's the next problem, which is problematic. Hey, why don't we get a stress test? Well, as I said before, a stress test is meant to predict heart attack, as JMK is asking. The bottom line is a stress test is not going to show up as a problem unless you've got 50% or more occlusion of blood flow into the heart. 2/3 of heart attacks occur in people that have plaque, but plaque that is less than 50% occlusion of blood flow to the heart. So bottom line, just that information right there. You tell me, are there better tests for risk stratification? I will say, yes, clearly there are. I would not rely solely on cardiovascular inflammation, though. I would look at a couple of other things that are procedures that are fairly easy to get. CT angiogram, CT calcium score, or CIMT. Any of those will beat the stress test as a predictor. Nina Copley, OMG, how are you to prevent a heart attack? This is, well, Nina, I'm not my patients are not having heart attacks, and I'm not either, and I'm fairly comfortable that we're not going to. And I'm not sure I guess it's depressing. The depressing part is there's so much misinformation out there. But once you realize that and act appropriately on that misinformation, it's really good news because you're doing the right thing and you really can take the risk of heart attack almost completely off the table. Jeff Clifford, thanks. Thank you, Jeff. Old Roscoe, my doctor needs to lose weight. There's this cardiologist in Florida, a lipidologist in Florida that he gets CIMTs, and Todd sends CIMTs into his office. And I've had a half dozen people say, he came in and he told me, yeah, I know Dr. Brewer, and he talks about this low carb and keto diet, and that's dangerous for you. I'm a lipidologist. I specialize in it. And the guy weighs over 250 pounds. And these folks are saying, he's got no credibility with me. I've called Todd and asked him to please not send patients to that group. But Todd's got a problem because I'm sending a lot of orders for CIMT, and we're remote. So we've got to find a place to get those done. So that's one of the unfortunate things that happens. Hopefully the docs that are preaching weight loss but not practicing, well, I don't know. I don't have a comment about that. I hope they can get their act together. Fort Worth West Side. Have you heard of external counter? Yes. External counter pulsation reportedly can increase the growth of blood vessels around the heart for those with blockage in other arteries. Saw this on Dr. Pradeep Jamnadas on YouTube. I'm a big Dr. J. Pradeep Jamnadas fan. One of my patients sees him as a regular cardiologist. I'm not the greatest fan of ECP, though. I don't think it's ready for prime time. It may get there at some point, but I don't think it is yet. Ricky the Gun 1. Good morning, Doc. Did you see the 60 Minutes piece on obesity this week? It was touting semaglutide or semaglutide as a weight loss drug and advocating its inclusion for insurance. Oh, I saw bits and pieces of it. I didn't get to see the whole thing. And I tell you, I've been saying this for over a year. There's a sea change going on in medicine associated with diabetes, therefore cardiovascular disease, and also obesity. Major revolution in drug-related care for it. I never used any of the other drugs. I've only used one drug for obesity, quote, for obesity, end quote, and that was metformin. I've never used fen-phen or any of that other stuff. I've always been an anti-drug doc, but when the world changes, you got to wake up and smell the coffee. These are a big deal. Melissa, is it safe for me to take vitamin K2 since I'm currently on Brilinta? Yes. If so, how much per day? Now, you can go to your doc who's got you on Brilinta. I would say yes. It's K2 does not do that. And how much per day do you recommend? We've had discussions, and I said I wouldn't take 100 micrograms. I'd either take 400 micrograms or 45 milligrams or somewhere in between. Bobby Ocampo, problem with lifestyle change is different doctors will have different advice. Yep. Most doctors in the Philippines are still encouraging a balanced diet based on the food pyramid with too many carbs. Well, you know what? Most docs here in the U.S. are still doing it. It's rapidly changing, but it's still most docs. And, one of the things I would say is look at the results of the study that we did today. If you can, again, I'm sure I'll get haters on this, but in my experience, body fat is more important than number of carbs. If you can, even if it's a high carb diet, if you can use that to get to decreased body fat, you're going to end up in a better place. So, I still prefer, and I think the evidence, my personal experience and the evidence are crystal clear. It's more effective with low carb eating, and you don't have that daily trip up into dangerous glucose levels and dangerous insulin levels. It's already been demonstrated that routinely having blood sugars over 140 and or routinely having elevated insulin levels causes cardiovascular inflammation and therefore plaque. So thank you for that instruction about joining our newsletter. If you'll take a look at that, again, thank you, Gilbert. If audience members will take a look at that, you can get more information from us in terms of, we provide a weekly newsletter to let you know what's going on with our content mostly, but we also talk about what's going on in the world of medicine and our place in it, our space there. Brendan Lenane, I sometimes have palpitations when I take my brand of K2 MK7, not MK4. Very pronounced with higher doses or without food. Only a few references to this online. I wonder what your thoughts were. There's nowhere in the windmills of my mind on that being associated with K2. But every time, I have to tell you though, Brendan, anytime and every time I hear of palpitations, I get nervous of people having paroxysmal atrial fib. In other words, atrial fibrillation that happens and then stops, happens and then stops. We used to think that other things were causing strokes. In fact, the most common cause of stroke was, I forgot what the term that they used. Somebody, I'm having a senior moment. Somebody remind me of the term that they used for that. But basically, it was a term meaning we didn't know what caused it. Well, at the end of the day, they began to find that in those people, more and more folks had atrial fib that just was not being recognized. So be careful. Atrial fibrillation is by far the most common cardiac dysrhythmia. It's like insulin resistance and diabetes. The vast majority of it is unrecognized. And like insulin resistance and diabetes, it is dangerous. It multiplies your risk for stroke specifically, not heart attack, but stroke specifically 5 to 8 times. So be very concerned if you have palpitations at any point, especially if you've had them over and over again, even if it's just associated with something like K2. And see about getting clearly getting atrial fib ruled out. Paroxysmal atrial fib means that you have it and then it goes away. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Either Gilbert or Aspen, I think probably Gilbert, put this up here. This is our link for the new YouTube channel and the new physician network website. So go take a look. Please go take a look at the channel especially. And we're getting videos uploaded. The last time you looked, last week we only had 2. This time I believe we've got 7, and we should have about 10 or 12 over the next couple of weeks. Those 10 or 12 videos will give you the basic core curriculum about what this all is. And you'll also see those links to those videos when you go to look at the website. So the website and the YouTube channel are the best places to go find out about how your doc can learn to do what we do. Thank you again, Rick, for your interest. Bobby Ocampo, what's the test for muscle mass? Well, by far the best one is, oh gosh, I'm having a senior moment. It's, you see it, it's the imaging study that looks at muscle mass and bone mass. It's the same technology that they use for bone, DEXA scan. So there are DEXA scans available, but the problem is the people that own the DEXA scans don't really make enough money just doing them for muscle mass. So it's not very common. You see it in some of the larger cities in the US, but that's really about it. And people say, oh no, I've got this electrical impedance. I've got these scales that I grab hold of. And I have to tell you, I'm skeptical of the technology and the reliability of that technology. Now, I would say, I don't argue too much with that. There's one of those versions that's become popular yet again with doctors. And here's the thing, I don't argue with it too much, even though I argue with the validity of the technology. I don't argue nearly so much with the docs that are using it, because this is so important. Muscle mass versus body fat. Now, to me, I got white hair. I'm 65 years old, and I tend to do low tech, immediately obvious stuff. But guess what? So does another old guy, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, he's been in the business all of his life of measuring muscle mass versus body fat. And he didn't use one of those machines. He used the jiggle test or the jump test. And what he said was, here, take your shirt off and get down to your Speedos if you've got them. I don't have any Speedos. I tried some once when I was a very young man. And you don't want to hear the rest of that story. Anyway, get in your underwear and jump up and down in front of a mirror. Everything that bounces is fat. That's a quote from Arnold. You can have a lot of disagreement with Arnold about other stuff, but I'm right with him on that stuff. There's one other place where I would bring up Arnold, and I bring him up on a regular basis. I've had 3 guys tell me this week that, well, I weigh a lot, but a lot of it's muscle mass. And I just, if I've got a standard response to that. Well, that's true. Muscles actually, muscle's more dense than fat. That's why people with a lot of muscle tend to sink more if they just relax in the water. Fat floats, muscle doesn't. But here's the issue. Arnold Schwarzenegger had a BMI of 30. So we're talking about BMIs and muscle here. So it's true. Arnold Schwarzenegger had a BMI of 30 when he won Mr. Olympia. He obviously didn't have any fat, or very much fat on him at that point in time. So if the patient looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger did when he won Mr. Olympia, back in the early 80s, then yeah, that BMI of 30 is actually probably healthy. It actually may be unhealthy for other reasons, but I hope you get the point. Catwalks 1, can you review the difference between Crestor and Lipitor? On a practical, you can get into lipophilic versus hydrophilic. That's one of the more common things that docs love to get into. I'm not going to go there because most people don't think along those terms. Most people think about how much does it cost and what does it do to me and what does it do for me. Both of them decrease cardiovascular inflammation, no matter what your genetics are. So you don't have to get a KIF6. You don't have to do any of that. Both of them work for decreasing cardiovascular inflammation, whether you're male or female. So you don't have to worry about that. Both of them are used in low doses. Neither one of them do you have to use in a high dose. They don't make pitavastatin. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. Let me erase the past 2 minutes of what I've been talking about. I thought you said Crestor versus Livalo. So let me go back. Here's the bottom line. Again, I am so sorry. But Crestor versus Lipitor. So Crestor actually decreases cardiovascular inflammation. Crestor also is very powerful at decreasing LDL. Lipitor is very good at decreasing LDL. It is not very good at decreasing cardiovascular inflammation. Crestor decreases cardiovascular inflammation even in low doses, 5 milligrams, even as little as 2.5 milligrams once a week. Lipitor does not. In fact, Lipitor has been shown not to be so good at decreasing cardiovascular inflammation if you have insulin resistance, diabetes, or prediabetes, and if you're a female. So if you're a female, that automatically knocks out half of us in terms of the cardiovascular inflammation piece. And if you have insulin resistance, well, that knocks out 80%. So you end up at the end of the day, Lipitor really helping significantly and reliably for cardiovascular inflammation in a vast minority of folks. It still helps some, but it's not as effective as Crestor or Livalo. So again, I hope that helped. And because I'm just not going to say it again. Rick at the Gun won. In the 60 Minutes segment, they stated that obesity was a mental disease and it was not due to the habits of the individual. Do you see any value in this theory? Well, obviously you can see values. You can also see other values. I mean, to say that obesity is a mental health disease, I don't think is true. There is some addiction value to it, and I talk about that all the time. And so, yes, addictions are a mental health disease. But for those of us that have actually tried, those of us with diabetes, or those of us that have tried GLP-1s like Ozempic, you get a very, very different view of. There's a major physical component here. So, I mean, you're asking, do I see any value in the theory? Of course, there are places where there's value, but there are also places where it breaks down, where it just is not going to work that well. And I think use of Ozempic is one of those places. Now, when you have the people that I've seen tons of them that were using stuff like that, and they still had obesity, of course, the behavioral components, the addictions, were overcoming any physical component that was being added there. So that's where you can get value for that. Bobo Ocampo, my HbA1c is 5.6, but my OGTT after an hour is 175, and insulin of 60. That's not an unusual 1 hour OGTT value for somebody at 5.6. I routinely see people with plaque, cardiovascular plaque, at an A1C of 5.6. And that's the point. You start getting, people don't diagnose diabetes till 6.5. So people think, oh, well, I'm looking at A1C, mine is 5.6, so I'm really basically healthy. No, you're not. And I think, Bobby, that's the point that you're making. I hope that it is. And mine is that level and higher. I've actually recorded a blood sugar level over 200 once. So technically that would make me a diabetic. Michael Kolasinski, calcium score, left main artery, 0. 229 on the left circumflex. That's interesting, because what was the LAD? Oh, LAD, left anterior descending, is 0. That's interesting because, no. I'm misreading your format here. Left main artery, 0, and the LAD is 229. There's a reason why the LAD is called the Widowmaker, and it's not because that's the most dangerous place. It's because that's the most common place to get calcification. If you look at Michael's further numbers, his right coronary has more, 414. That's actually not that common. Asymptomatic 60-year-old worried keto. Not sure exactly what worried keto means, but am I worried about that? No, I've got people that came to me just, as you might guess, dying can be an emotional event, and fear of dying can be even more emotional. Now, one of the demographics, my demographic, old men, especially like in their 60s, we were taught never to cry. Men don't cry. Well, I do, but I had to go through that too, that, men don't cry. And there was a time when I went for decades without crying. But I will tell you this, I get men that come to see me that don't cry, that cry when they start talking to me about their calcium, especially about their calcium score. That's one of the most common reasons for coming to see me, because, I had a calcium score. And these guys with calcium scores over 1,000, think I am dead. I am just, I'm getting my affairs in order. Well, 2 or 3 years later, they're planning a trip somewhere because they're totally comfortable in their life. And that's the way you should be. Calcium score alone is not going to worry me. I'm glad to hear something about keto, and I hope that means that you're not eating a lot of carbs anymore, because that would be dangerous. Even more so, I'd like for you to tell us what your BMI is, what your body fat composition is, what your jump test looks like. JMK 2921, I saw the same 60-minute show last Sunday. I was blown away when the obesity specialist doctor said that the major driver of obesity is in our genetics. There's some components to that, but, again, and I have to tell you, it's long been the major common knowledge among healthcare providers that obesity was a mental health disease, until stuff like a couple of things came out recently. There was a group of specialists that met recently. It was a global group of specialists, and they made the point, and I agree with them, that common knowledge is often not common, and it's often not knowledge. And in this case, I don't think it was knowledge, because yes, there are major behavioral components. Yes, there are addiction components, but there is so much more to obesity than just that. The other place, which again I've referred to several times today and many times over the past couple of years, and that is this whole change with the GLP-1 drug class. People are beginning to realize that, yeah, there's addictive behavior, but there was something physical. So often there was something physical that was underpinning all of that. Now, I think we're getting long in the tooth in terms of, okay, I've got a few more minutes. Let's see how many more of these we can cover. Jerry Penisi, is Ozempic better than extended fasting and intermittent fasting? Well, I mean, that's such a difficult question. I've said a couple of times, well, I guess you could maybe logically put it this way. I've seen plenty of people lose weight, 30, 50, 150 pounds on extended fasting, intermittent fasting, and keto. Without Ozempic, but I haven't seen anybody. Well, let me rephrase that. I've also seen plenty of people lose a lot of weight without working hard to change their lifestyle with Ozempic. And I've seen plenty of people taking Ozempic that stayed too heavy, that didn't lose any weight, and in fact gained weight. Bobby O'Camp, I hope you can have a fellowship specialization on PrevMed. I do too. As you start to look at some more developments in medicine, one of these first ones being the fee for value that we've been discussing. Another one being the use of, well, I don't have it here. It's over there. Wearables. Wearables are going to become a big, big issue. And most of the wearables revolution is going to be in prevention. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to get to all of these questions. We've got a lot of interesting questions today. I'll get through a couple more and then I'm going to have to run. Jenny Panisi, great stuff. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate that. Bobby Ocampo, I wish there would be more trial on prolonged fasting and its effect on chronic diseases, CKD, retinopathy. Again, I mean, you know what it's going to show. Prolonged fasting is going to show that people break that addiction habit with food, no matter what sort of physical drivers you may have there. If you can get through the prolonged fasting components, you start getting through and breaking a lot of the physical components, changing them dramatically, the physical components of those addictions, and you lose weight. If you can lose weight, you're going to have a big impact on CKD and retinopathy. For those of you who don't know what CKD is, it's chronic kidney disease. Craig Bax. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Bax is a friend and colleague, and one of those docs that uses the weight machine that I talked about a few minutes ago, or the scales that talk about body, that estimate body fat and muscle, is a great doc in this space. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help you. The scariest words in the English language. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Maybe you're referring to the point that it's going to be a long time before fee for value is actually a direct pay kind of component. But maybe you can clarify. Aura Ruth Kamieni. Good to hear from you, Aura. Mabuhay, Doc. Just switched to computer from phone because I couldn't write. Mabuhay, Bobby Ocampo. Nice to hear from you again. Mabuhay. Long life, healthy life. Broken forever. Hey, Dr. Question. I've been dealing with ApoB and LDL with my primary, who's only an NRP. Did you mean registered nurse practitioner, RNP? Keeps telling me, get off my diet or start a statin. And then I ask for LP(a), HS, high sensitivity C-reactive protein to check inflammation markers. And let's skip over. So keep saying my insurance probably will deny it because no reason to, but there's a reason. Instead of just doing it, they keep saying they may not. Well, one of the other things that happens is when you're the provider, healthcare provider, the doctor, the nurse practitioner, you're coming across as the expert. You're considered the expert in all of your interactions during the day. And when you get presented something that you don't understand, and the patient may understand better than you, sometimes most of the time, you've begun to believe your own Kool-Aid, drink your own Kool-Aid and believe your own whatever. And you think, well, if the patient's suggesting it and I haven't heard of it, it can't be right. And guess what? The insurance is not going to pay for it anyway. I get it. You can come see us. We do that across the country. I'm licensed. I mean, that's what I do for a living. There's less and less time for me to see patients, but we do what we can to try to make time to do that. Let's go back to JMK 2921. I think your new Physicians Prevention Network is a great idea. However, 2 of the cardiologists that I've seen in the last year would have no interest, my way or the highway. I get that. And in fact, I expect I would have absolutely no surprise that you suggest that to your doc and they're going to have no interest for the same reason we just discussed about the NP a few minutes ago, where they're the expert and nothing that the patient can bring them could possibly be something that they don't know about, but is right. But I have to tell you, I get it over and over and over again. Patients say, Doc, will you set up something to train my doc? So I'm doing it. No trash in heaven. I'll bet he lost muscle. I bet you're talking about either Schwarzenegger or Penn Jillette. And I bet both of them did. So here's the question. Will you also bet me that Penn Jillette lost more muscle or as much muscle as fat? Will you bet me that he's at greater cardiovascular risk? Because I'll take that bet. Yeah, referring to the potato diet. Or Ruth again. Bobby, there are studies in Japan which have confirmed the benefit of taking 45 milligrams K2 to reverse osteoporosis. Yes, we talked about that. I've reversed my femoral osteoporosis. Thank you for sharing that, Aura Ruth. Back to osteopenia in 2 years, taking 45 milligrams per day. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's one thing to hear a doctor like me standing up pontificating and talking about what I see in the scientific evidence. It's a very different thing for a patient to say, yep, I did it. This is what happened. Melissa, what if you have to take full dose aspirin because you have stents? Asking this question when listening to you about talking about aspirin. Yes, so it's a different issue if you already have stents and you're in a different category of need for clot prevention. And at that point, even though you're engaging a different mechanism, you've got different needs. So I apologize that I won't be able to get to all the questions today. It's been great. A lot of very interesting questions, very good questions. And thank you for your interest, and hope we'll see you next week.